Good afternoon, my friends. The picture is starting to become much clearer after the Detroit Lions wrapped up OTAs and minicamp, and one of the biggest questions fans are asking right now is what this roster could look like when the regular season arrives. While training camp will still bring competition, surprises, and difficult decisions, there are already several strong indications about where players stand heading into the next phase of the offseason. At quarterback, the Lions appear to be in a very straightforward situation. Jared Goff remains the unquestioned starter, and the battle right now is centered around the backup role and developmental depth. Based on everything we've seen so far, Teddy Bridgewater appears to have the inside track to secure the primary backup position. His experience, leadership, and familiarity with the organization make him a valuable presence behind Goff. For a team with championship aspirations, having a veteran who understands the system and can essentially function as an extra coach on the sideline carries significant value. That doesn't mean Luke Altmaier's performance has gone unnoticed. In fact, he has generated positive impressions throughout offseason activities. However, asking a rookie to immediately leapfrog an experienced veteran such as Bridgewater would be difficult at this stage. The more realistic path appears to be a practice squad role, where Altmaier can continue developing while remaining within the organization. Modern practice squads provide far more opportunities than they once did, allowing young players to receive meaningful work and continue progressing without being forced into a roster spot prematurely. The running back room looks equally intriguing. Jahmyr Gibbs remains the featured weapon and centerpiece of the ground attack. His explosiveness and versatility make him one of the most dangerous offensive players on the roster. Behind him, Isaiah Pacheco provides another proven option capable of handling a significant workload if necessary. What may be most interesting, however, is the competition involving Sione Vaki and Jacob Sailors. Both players bring additional value through special teams contributions, something that often determines the final roster decisions. In a league where versatility matters, players who can contribute in multiple phases gain a substantial advantage. With return duties also still being discussed, every snap throughout training camp could become critical for those competing for these spots. At wide receiver, the group appears remarkably settled compared to some previous years. Amon-Ra St. Brown remains the unquestioned leader of the room, while Jameson Williams continues to provide the explosive playmaking ability that can change games instantly. Isaac Taslea has positioned himself strongly within the rotation, while Greg Dortch offers experience and versatility. One of the more notable developments affecting this group has been the injury to Kendrick Law, which significantly altered the competition. Injuries always create ripple effects throughout a roster, and this situation appears no different. As a result, opportunities have opened elsewhere, and one player may be benefiting more than anyone expected. That player is Jackson Meeks. Perhaps one of the most fascinating stories emerging from the offseason is Meeks' transition from wide receiver to tight end. Following conversations with the coaching staff after last season, the young player committed to reshaping his body and embracing a new role. He reportedly added approximately 20 pounds, bringing his weight into a range much more suitable for the tight end position, and by all accounts, the early results have been encouraging. Instead of struggling through the transition, Meeks has reportedly adapted well during practices. His receiving background naturally helps him as a pass catcher, while his increased size gives him an opportunity to compete in a completely different role within the offense. For a player searching for a path onto the roster, the position switch may prove to be a career-changing decision. The Lions' tight end room already appears to be one of the deepest groups on the entire roster. Sam Laporta continues to establish himself as one of the premier young tight ends in football. Tyler Conklin adds proven veteran experience and reliability. Brock Wright remains a trusted contributor who understands his responsibilities within the offense. If Jackson Meeks successfully claims the fourth spot, Detroit could enter the season with one of the strongest and most versatile tight end groups in the league. The combination of receiving ability, blocking potential, experience, and developmental upside would give offensive coordinator flexibility in numerous personnel packages. What's especially interesting is that this development reflects the coaching staff's willingness to identify alternative paths for talented players. Rather than allowing Meeks to become buried on the depth chart at wide receiver, the organization explored another opportunity, and early indications suggest that gamble may be paying off. As training camp approaches, the spotlight will continue shining on these position battles. The quarterback situation seems relatively stable. The running back competition remains highly competitive. The wide receiver room appears largely established. But the emergence of Jackson Meeks as a legitimate tight end candidate could become one of the most unexpected stories of the entire offseason. If Meeks continues building momentum and the Lions maintain the depth they have shown throughout OTAs and minicamp, could this tight end group ultimately become the deepest and most important position unit on the entire roster heading into the 2026 season? The offensive line may quietly be the most important storyline on the entire roster, because while the headlines usually focus on skill players and defensive stars, championships are often decided in the trenches. And based on everything coming out of OTAs and minicamp, Detroit may have assembled its deepest offensive line under Brad Holmes. What's making this group stand out isn't just the starting talent, it's the competition and experience sitting behind the starters. One of the most closely watched battles continues to be at left guard. Christian Mahogany remains firmly in the conversation, but the competition is far from settled. The coaching staff appears determined to let this battle play out all the way through training camp, ensuring the best possible player earns the job rather than handing it to anyone by default. What makes this situation particularly encouraging for Lions fans is the depth surrounding the position. Unlike previous seasons where injuries could immediately create concerns, Detroit now has multiple players with meaningful experience who can step into larger roles if needed. Players such as Tate Ratledge, Blake Miller, Juice Scruggs, Miles Frazier, Larry Borum, and others have either started games, played significant snaps, or demonstrated enough potential to keep the coaching staff comfortable. That wasn't always the case in recent years. There were times when injuries along the offensive line created genuine concern about whether the unit could maintain its level of play. Now the conversation feels completely different. Instead of asking whether the Lions have enough offensive linemen, fans are debating which capable players might not make the final roster. That's a luxury every contender wants to have. The improvements in depth aren't accidental either. This appears to be a direct response from Brad Holmes and the front office after seeing some of the challenges the team faced in previous seasons. Building depth across the offensive line became a priority, and the current roster reflects that commitment. Then we move over to the defensive line, where another fascinating battle is taking shape. The foundation is already established. Aiden Hutchinson remains the centerpiece of the pass rush and one of the most important players on the entire roster. Alongside him, Ali McNeil, Tyleek Williams, Derek Moore, and DJ Wanham provide a strong core that gives Detroit talent both on the edge and in the interior. But some of the most important roster decisions may involve the players fighting for those final defensive line spots. Ahmed Hassanain continues to generate attention as a potential contributor. Reports indicate he has added size and continued developing as a pass rusher. For players competing on the edge of the roster, every offseason rep matters, and Hassanain appears to be making the most of his opportunities. Then there's Levi Onwuzurike. This may be one of the more overlooked stories on the roster. Before injuries interrupted his momentum, Onwuzurike was showing encouraging signs of development. Now the focus shifts toward whether he can stay healthy and continue building on that progress. If he does, Detroit could receive a significant boost from a player who has already demonstrated flashes of his potential. Peyton Turner and Tyler Lacey have also reportedly earned positive attention from coaches throughout OTAs and minicamp. In a roster battle where every detail matters, hearing coaches mention specific players often carries significance. It doesn't guarantee a roster spot, but it certainly suggests those players are putting themselves firmly in the conversation. Meanwhile, several younger players appear likely headed toward developmental roles on the practice squad. That isn't necessarily a negative outcome. In today's NFL, the practice squad serves as a critical extension of the roster, allowing teams to continue developing prospects while maintaining valuable organizational depth. At linebacker, things appear much simpler. Some position groups enter training camp with major uncertainty. Linebacker doesn't appear to be one of them. Jack Campbell remains the leader of the unit and continues to grow into one of the defense's most important pieces. Alongside him, Derek Barnes, Jimmy Rolder, Trevor Nowaske, and Malcolm Rodriguez give Detroit a group that already looks fairly defined before training camp even begins. In fact, this may be one of the easiest position groups on the entire roster to project. There simply aren't as many complicated decisions compared to other areas of the team. Most of the key contributors are already known, and barring an unexpected development, the linebacker room appears relatively stable heading into camp. That stability allows the coaching staff to focus more attention on several of the highly competitive battles occurring elsewhere on the roster. And when you combine the offensive line competition, the defensive line depth battles, and the ongoing evaluations taking place throughout the roster, it's clear that some of the toughest decisions are are still ahead. What may surprise many fans is that some talented players are inevitably going to be cut simply because the Lions have built enough depth that not everyone can stay. That's often the reality for teams with championship aspirations. The secondary may ultimately become one of the most fascinating units to watch throughout training camp, because while several spots appear secure, there are still important questions that could impact how this defense looks once the regular season begins. At cornerback, the Lions appear prepared to carry significant depth, and that's something this organization has clearly prioritized. After dealing with injuries and inconsistency at times in previous years, Detroit has continued investing resources into creating competition and building a deeper defensive backfield. Terrion Arnold is expected to be a major part of that future. The young corner continues to be viewed as one of the key building blocks of the defense, and every offseason rep is another opportunity for him to grow into an even larger role. Alongside him, DJ Reed brings proven veteran experience and immediate credibility to the position group. Those two players alone give Detroit a strong foundation, but what makes the room interesting is what comes after them. Ennis Rakestraw Jr. remains one of the players fans are watching most closely. The talent has never really been the question. Health has been the bigger concern. If he can stay available and continue stacking productive practices, he has every opportunity to secure an important role within the defense. The coaching staff undoubtedly wants to see him build momentum because his development could significantly strengthen the overall depth of the secondary. Then there are veterans who understand exactly what it takes to survive in the NFL. Rock Ya-Sin brings experience and reliability. Coaches know what they're getting from him, and players with that profile often become extremely valuable over the course of a long season. Injuries happen, matchups change, depth gets tested. Having veterans who can step in and perform meaningful snaps often becomes the difference between good defenses and great ones. Khalil Dorsey represents another important piece because of his special teams value. Sometimes fans focus exclusively on defensive snaps when evaluating roster decisions, but special teams contributions frequently determine who earns those final roster spots. Dorsey's ability to help in multiple phases of the game gives him additional value beyond simply what he does at cornerback. Then we arrive at safety, where one of the most notable offseason developments involves Brian